I never imagined that the man standing before me in an orange vest, convicted of a crime, was the anonymous angel who gave my daughter her first steps. This is the story of a single father, a stern judge, and the hidden connection that would shatter a courtroom and rebuild a family. To understand this collision of two worlds, you need to meet them both as they were that morning. Judge Elena Vance, a woman who believed the law was black and white, and Leo, the single father mechanic who saw every broken thing as something he could fix. One held the power to sentence, the other faced a sentence he didn't deserve. The question was no longer about guilt or innocence, but what happens when the person who judges your worst moment has already benefited from your best. In her courtroom, Judge Elena Vance was known for two things: her impeccable record and a daughter named Chloe who had learned to walk 3 separate times. The first was at 18 months. The second was at age 5, after a congenital condition took her leg below the knee. The third was just 6 months ago when a custom-made carbon fiber prosthetic mailed to them anonymously arrived at their door. It changed everything. Chloe could run, she could jump. She stopped being the girl with the limp and started being the girl who could keep up. For Elena, that anonymous gift was a miracle that existed outside the rigid systems she presided over. It was a kindness with no paperwork, no means test, just pure grace. Meanwhile, across town in a garage that smelled of motor oil and sawdust, Leo Martinez was trying to make rent. A single dad to his 8-year-old son, Mateo, Leo's world was one of practical solutions. He fixed what was broken: cars, appliances, and in a hidden corner of his workshop, prosthetic limbs. He taught himself biomechanics from online forums and library books. He used a 3D printer funded by selling his own truck. For Leo, it was simple math. A traditional prosthetic leg could cost between $2,000 and $5,000. His versions, crafted from repurposed materials and open-source designs, cost less than $30 to make. He gave them away. No names, no credit. To him, a child's mobility wasn't a luxury, it was a right. But the system has a way of catching up to people who operate outside it. Leo's downfall wasn't his secret charity, it was a favor. His neighbor, desperate and behind on his own bills, had asked Leo to look at a car he was selling. Leo did a quick safety check, noted the worn brakes, and told him it wasn't roadworthy. The neighbor sold it anyway. The buyer, after a minor fender bender, claimed Leo had certified the vehicle as safe. It was a lie, but the paper trail was messy. Leo's handwritten note about the brakes was deemed insufficient. The buyer was connected. Leo, with no money for a powerful lawyer, was charged with fraudulent mechanic work. So on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain, these two parallel lives converged in courtroom 4. Elena Vance, back straight beneath her robe, reviewed the case file. Another small-time fraud, she thought. Another person trying to cut corners. To her, the law was a scaffold holding society upright. Compassion was for sentencing hearings, not for establishing facts. Leo stood before her, hands clenched. He explained the truth, but it sounded thin even to him. He saw a system that protected property, but not people. He thought of Mateo, waiting at after-school care. He thought of the 3 prosthetic arms in his workshop, half-finished for kids he'd never met. Elena listened, her face a mask of judicial neutrality. She saw a man in his mid-30s, strong shoulders tense under a cheap dress shirt. She noted his calm resignation, the lack of the usual bluster or anger from the wrongly accused. It read to her as guilt. The evidence, however circumstantial, was clear. Her duty was clear. She spoke the words that would define Leo's next year: 200 hours of community service. She specified the location: the Brookside Children's Hospital Rehabilitation Center. It was a standard assignment for nonviolent offenders, a place to wash windows, move supplies, pay a debt to society. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Brookside was where her own daughter, Chloe, went for physical therapy twice a week. It was the very hospital where, months earlier, a therapist had quietly taken Chloe's measurements, mysteriously promising her mother that a solution was coming. Those measurements had found their way to an online forum, and from there, to Leo's workshop. Leo accepted the sentence without complaint. Community service was better than jail. He thought of the hospital as just another broken system, another place where he'd be invisible labor. He had no idea that the judge who had just branded him a criminal was the mother of the little blonde girl whose laugh was taped to his workshop wall, a photo sent by a grateful therapist as a thank you, with all identifying details carefully removed. The first day of his service, Leo reported to Brookside's maintenance office, was given an orange vest and a list of tasks. He pushed a mop through long linoleum corridors that echoed with the sounds of children. He passed a physical therapy gym full of parallel bars and exercise balls, and that's when he saw her, a young girl maybe 7 with long blonde hair, determinedly walking on a familiar-looking carbon fiber leg, holding the hand of a therapist. It was Chloe. His breath caught. He'd recognize his own work anywhere, the specific contour of the socket, the unique geometric pattern he'd laser-etched into the carbon fiber for strength and style. He'd called that design the Sparrow. He froze, mop in hand, the reality crashing into him with the force of a physical blow. The girl from the photo, his prosthetic. Here in this hospital, the math completed itself with terrifying clarity. The judge, the last name on the docket, Vance. Oh God, Judge Vance's daughter was his Sparrow. At that exact moment, turning the corner with a clipboard in hand, was Judge Elena Vance herself. She was there for Chloe's monthly progress meeting. She stopped, her eyes passing over the maintenance worker in the orange vest, then snapping back. Her brow furrowed, the convict from her courtroom, here, in her daughter's sanctuary. A flush of protective fury rose in her chest. This was her child's safe place. She took a step forward, her mouth opening to summon a supervisor, to demand why he was anywhere near the pediatric wing. And then her eyes dropped. They followed Leo's paralyzed gaze past her to where Chloe was taking triumphant, unassisted steps across the gym floor. Elena saw the leg. She saw the way Leo was looking at it, not with curiosity, but with a deep, knowing recognition. The pattern, the Sparrow, her mind, trained to piece together disparate evidence, began to connect fragments she had refused to see. The anonymous gift, the mechanic, the timing. The online forum, where she'd posted a desperate plea for help years ago. Her hand flew to her chest. The clipboard clattered to the floor. The sound made Chloe turn and Leo look up. Their eyes met, the judge and the mechanic, across a hallway that suddenly felt as vast and silent as a courtroom. In Leo's eyes, she didn't see guilt. She saw the man who had built a Sparrow for her daughter to fly. The silence that followed wasn't just an absence of sound. It was the sound of a worldview cracking. For 5 full seconds, Judge Elena Vance did not move. Her legal mind, a machine built on precedent and evidence, scrambled to reconcile 2 impossible truths. The man in the orange vest was a convict. The man in the orange vest was also almost certainly the architect of her daughter's joy. The prosthetic leg wasn't just similar to Chloe's, it was identical. She knew every curve, every unique geometric cutout. She studied it for hours, wondering about the hands that made it. Those hands were now holding a mop. Leo was the first to break the stare. He looked down, a flush of shame and panic heating his neck. This was his worst fear realized, not the law but the personal connection. His anonymity was his shield. It protected him from gratitude, from obligation, and from exactly this kind of devastating complication. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A plea, don't. But Elena was already in motion. She bent mechanically to pick up her fallen clipboard. Her movements were stiff. "Chloe," she said, her voice tighter than usual, "go with Ms. Amy, I'll be right there." The therapist, sensing the electric tension, gently guided a confused Chloe toward the parallel bars. Elena then turned her full attention to Leo. She walked toward him, each step measured. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak quietly, but far enough to maintain a judge's distance. "The Sparrow design," she said, her voice low and controlled. "The carbon fiber is sanded to a specific 45-degree bevel at the ankle joint. I've never seen that on any other prosthetic. Who are you?" Leo swallowed. He could lie. He could say he'd seen it online, but the look in her eyes wasn't accusatory anymore. It was desperate. It was the look of a mother who had prayed for a miracle and was now standing face to face with it, wearing the wrong face. "It's for weight distribution," he heard himself say, his voice rough. "Reduces shear stress on the residual limb during a sprint." It was the exact technical reasoning he'd typed into an online message 3 years prior, in a private forum for open-source prosthetic design. Elena's breath caught. Those were the words, the anonymous designer's notes which she had printed and kept in a folder. A sob, harsh and sudden, choked in her throat. She clamped a hand over her mouth, turning away from him for a moment, her shoulders trembling. The dam broke. All the professional detachment, the black and white certainty of her courtroom, washed away in a flood of overwhelming, disorienting gratitude. This man, this convicted man. She turned back, her eyes glistening. You built her leg. It wasn't a question. Leo gave a single, tired nod. I didn't know who she was. The therapist. She sent measurements. No name, just patient C, age 7, congenital tibial deficiency. I built the Sparrow for her. The institutional machinery around them continued to whir. A cart rattled by. A phone rang at the nurse's station. Their conversation was a bubble of surreal intimacy in the sterile hallway. Elena's mind raced ahead to the catastrophic implications. She had sentenced her daughter's benefactor to community service for a crime he likely didn't commit. The conflict of interest was so profound it threatened to unravel her career. If this got out, her judgment would be questioned in every case she'd ever presided over. The press would eviscerate her. The Judicial Review Board would have a field day. But a louder, more primal voice drowned out the professional fear. This man had given her child the gift of movement. He had asked for nothing. He had used his own skill, his own resources, to solve a problem that the medical industrial complex priced at $5,000. He had done it in secret for a stranger. The case, she said, her voice regaining some of its steadiness. Your case, tell me everything, the truth. And so, standing there in the hallway, Leo told her. He told her about his neighbor, the car, the handwritten note about the brakes that was dismissed. He told her about the buyer who knew a city inspector, about the pressure to pin it on someone, and how a mechanic without a fancy license was the easiest target. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, the same way he explained a repair. He was fixing a story now, not a car. Elena listened, her judge's mind cataloging the inconsistencies he described, the lack of proper procedure, the hearsay evidence that should have been challenged. She felt a cold nausea. She had been the instrument of a small, cruel injustice. She had looked at his resignation and seen guilt, when it was just the exhaustion of a man who knew the system was too big to fight. I need to see your workshop, she said abruptly. Leo blinked. What, why? Because I need to understand, she said, the command in her voice returning, but softened by something new, a need to know him. I need to see the place where you built sparrows, tonight, after your service hours. It was an extraordinary, borderline unethical request. A judge conducting a private investigation into a defendant she'd sentenced, but the normal rules had vaporized. Leo, seeing no alternative, nodded. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, Elena Vance drove to an address in a part of town she never visited. She parked outside a modest duplex with a detached garage. Leo was waiting, having arranged for his son Matteo to be at a friend's house. He led her through a side door, flipping on a fluorescent light. Elena stepped into a space that defied all expectation. It wasn't a dank mechanic's hole. It was part workshop, part sanctuary. One wall was lined with tools meticulously organized. Another held a small, well-used 3D printer, its spools of filament stacked like colorful thread. But it was the back wall that stole her breath. Photographs, dozens of them, pinned to corkboard. Children of all ages, smiling, running, kicking soccer balls, on legs and arms she recognized. Her eyes instantly found Chloe, the same photo she had, sent by the grateful therapist. Here it was, among a constellation of joyful strangers. Beneath the photos were shelves holding finished and in-progress devices. A tiny, robotic hand for a toddler, a sleek, athletic blade for a teenager, a white prototype arm with elegant, articulated fingers. Each was labeled with a code, not a name. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the carbon fiber of a leg, feeling the precision of the work. You do this here, alone, she whispered. Mostly, Leo said, watching her take it in. The designs are open source, I modify them. The printer was crowdfunded, sort of. I sold my truck. The materials, some are donated scrap from aerospace companies, some I buy. Each arm averages about $30 in plastic, wiring, and sensors. The legs are more, maybe $150. Elena's mind reeled at the numbers. $30, $150. She thought of the $20,000 prosthetic limb her insurance had initially denied, calling it cosmetic. She thought of the foundation that had finally helped, but only after mountains of paperwork. This man in his garage was bypassing the entire broken system. Why? The question left her lips before she could stop it. It was the one question she had for the anonymous angel. Why do this and not take any credit, not even let people know? Leo leaned against a workbench, crossing his arms. He looked at the photos. When my wife died, the world kept turning. People said sorry, then they moved on. Grief makes you invisible. So does being poor. So does being disabled. I fix cars because it's my job. I fix these, he gestured to the prosthetics, because it makes people visible again. Credit doesn't matter. Seeing them run matters. His words landed in the quiet garage with the weight of a verdict. Elena Vance, who had spent her life believing in the supreme power of official systems, the law, medicine, insurance, was standing in a shadow system. A system run on compassion and ingenuity, operating in the gaps the official one left behind. And she had just dragged one of its only operators into her own system and branded him a criminal. The ethical chasm before her was now a canyon. She could recuse herself from his case, request a review, maybe even get the conviction overturned. But that would require explaining why. It would expose Leo's secret workshop. It might bring scrutiny that could shut him down for practicing medicine without a license or 100 other bureaucratic violations. His entire operation, this beautiful, fragile ecosystem of gift-giving, was illegal in the eyes of the very institutions she represented. Alternatively, she could say nothing, let him complete his service. The debt would be paid, and their paths would diverge. But that meant living with the knowledge that she had punished a good man for a crime he didn't commit. It meant her daughter's freedom was built on the back of an injustice she herself had delivered. She turned to him, her professional composure gone, replaced by raw, conflicted anguish. I sentenced you. You did your job with the information you had, Leo replied, surprising her with his lack of bitterness. The system presented you with a case. You ruled on the case. That's the machine. It's a broken machine, she breathed. Yeah, he said with a sad smile. Most of them are. That's why we have to build new things in the garage. He walked to a small fridge, pulled out 2 sodas, and offered her one. It was a simple human gesture that shattered the last of the formal barriers between them. They were just 2 people in a garage, surrounded by the physical proof of quiet kindness. They talked for an hour, not about the case, but about the work. He showed her how the 3D printer layered the plastic, how he sourced tiny motors for finger joints from discarded drones, how he used heat from a modified hair straightener to thermoform sockets for a perfect fit. She was a quick study, asking sharp questions. For the first time in years, she wasn't a judge. She was a student. When she finally left, the weight in her chest had changed. It was no longer the sharp stab of shock, but a heavy, pressing dread of the decision she now had to make. She drove home in a daze. Chloe was already asleep. Elena went straight to her home office, to the folder marked Prosthetic Research. She laid the anonymous designers forum printouts next to a photo of Leo from his driver's license, which was in the court file. The writing style matched. The technical insights matched. She then did something she had never done before. She began researching the plaintiff in Leo's case, the man who bought the car. A few phone calls to a discreet investigator friend, a search through some public databases she had access to, and a pattern emerged. The man had a history of small-scale, litigious fraud. 3 other mechanics in the past 5 years had faced similar, quickly dropped complaints. Leo wasn't a lone target. He was the latest victim of a scam that relied on overcrowded courts and defendants who couldn't afford a fight. The conviction wasn't just a mistake. It was the system failing in exactly the way Leo assumed it would, and she had been its willing, efficient instrument. The next morning, Leo reported back to the hospital. His supervisor handed him a new assignment: organize the storage closet for the physical therapy department. It was a solitary task. As he sorted through boxes of therapeutic putty and resistance bands, the door opened. Judge Vance walked in, closing it softly behind her. She was in civilian clothes, a blouse and slacks, but her authority still filled the small space. I looked into the buyer, she said without preamble. He's a known nuisance litigant. Your neighbor confirmed your story about the warning. The case should never have made it to my courtroom. Leo set down a box. Okay. Okay, that's it, she asked, frustrated by his calm. Don't you want it overturned? Don't you want your name cleared? Of course I do, Leo said, his voice low. But a court review means hearings. Lawyers, reporters maybe, they'll dig into my life, they'll find this. He gestured around, meaning the hospital, but meaning so much more. They'll find my workshop. What do you think happens then? The city will shut me down for code violations. The medical board will call it unauthorized practice. They'll take my tools, they'll erase the sparrows. He looked at her, his eyes clear and weary. A clean record isn't worth that. Elena stared at him. He was willing to carry the stigma of a criminal conviction to protect his ability to give gifts. The nobility of it was staggering, and it made her feel small and compromised. Her desire to fix her mistake was, in part, selfish. She wanted to clear her own conscience. There has to be another way, she insisted. Just then, the closet door swung open. It was the hospital's head administrator, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, with Leo's supervisor behind him. Henderson's eyes narrowed, flicking from Leo in his orange vest to the well-dressed woman in the closet with him. Judge Vance, he said, recognizing her, is there a problem? Is this inmate causing an issue? The word inmate hung in the air, ugly and dehumanizing. Leo flinched. Elena's back straightened, her judicial mask snapping back into place instinctively. No issue, Mr. Henderson. I was following up on a community service placement, ensuring it's satisfactory. The lie was smooth, professional. Henderson looked suspicious. Well, all interactions with service workers need to go through volunteer coordination. For security, you understand. Of course, Elena said, her tone cool. My oversight. She gave Leo a curt, impersonal nod. Carry on. And she swept past Henderson, out of the closet, her heart hammering against her ribs. The incident was a warning shot. They were being watched. Their secret, born in a moment of stunned recognition in a hallway, was now a tangible, dangerous thing. It had weight. It could cost her her career. It could cost him his life's work. And it was trapped in a storage closet with a hospital administrator who now had questions. Elena spent the rest of the day in her chambers, but she couldn't focus on her docket. She replayed the scene, Henderson's suspicious face, Leo's resigned acceptance of his fate, Chloe's laugh in the therapy gym, the sparrow design. She was caught in a trilemma with no good exit. Protect the secret and live a lie, expose the secret and destroy 2 lives, or take a third, uncharted path. That night she found herself back on the online forum where this all began. She hadn't logged in for years. There was her old post, a mother's desperate plea for help for her 5-year-old, and below it, years later, a response from a user named Fix It Forward. The response contained the initial Sparrow design sketches. She clicked on the username. His profile was bare, except for a tagline, "If you can fix it, you should." She started reading other threads. Fix It Forward was everywhere, answering questions from parents in India about socket fittings, advising a veteran in Texas on waterproofing a prosthetic for swimming, explaining to a clinic in Guatemala how to modify a design using bicycle parts. This wasn't just a hobbyist. This was the central node in a global, informal network of aid. Leo was a one-man humanitarian agency operating out of a garage. And she had made him a convict. A new, terrifying thought crystallized. What if she wasn't the only one who could connect the dots? What if the buyer from the car case, or his connected friend, decided to dig deeper to discredit Leo further? What if they found this forum? Her daughter's medical details were in that thread. Her own username was there. The connection could be uncovered by anyone with malicious intent and a little digging. The secret wasn't just an ethical burden. It was a ticking bomb, and Mr. Henderson at the hospital had just smelled the smoke. The bomb didn't explode in a courtroom or a garage. It detonated in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of the hospital's legal counsel. 3 days after the storage closet incident, Elena was summoned, not as a judge, but as the mother of a patient. Sitting across from the hospital lawyer and a fidgeting Mr. Henderson, she listened as they laid out their concerns. They had reviewed security footage. They had seen her private conversation with the community service worker, Leo Martinez, in the hallway. They had seen the closet meeting. Judge Vance, the lawyer began, tenting his fingers, we have a strict policy regarding unsupervised contact with individuals in the corrections program. It's a liability issue, but beyond that, our staff noted your particular interest in this individual. We did a routine background check on Mr. Martinez, as we do with all service workers. His conviction is for fraudulent mechanic work. Now, we see a municipal court judge taking a special interest. We have to ask, is there something about his case we should know? Is he a threat? Elena's blood ran cold. They were investigating Leo because of her asterisk. Her actions had painted a target on his back. The system was turning its gaze, and its gaze was bureaucratic, suspicious, and utterly devoid of the context she held. There is no threat, Elena said, her voice carefully measured. I was performing due diligence on a court-ordered placement, ensuring the hospital's environment was appropriate. That is within my purview. It was a stretch, but delivered with enough judicial authority to give them pause. Mr. Henderson leaned forward. Due diligence usually involves speaking with a supervisor, judge, not having closed-door meetings with the worker, and it doesn't explain why you were seen visiting his private residence later that same evening. A neighbor reported an official-looking car. They had followed her, or someone had been watching Leo. The walls were closing in. She realized then that the conflict of interest was the least of her problems. The perception of misconduct was now a real, documented thing. A judge visiting a convict's home, it screamed of impropriety. She had to think fast. My visit was part of a broader community assessment, she lied, her mind racing. The court is reviewing its community service partnerships. Mr. Martinez's living situation is relevant to his rehabilitation. It was an unannounced spot check. The excuse was thin, but it was a legalistic framework she could hide behind. The lawyer exchanged a look with Henderson. They didn't believe her, but they also didn't want to outright accuse a judge of lying. Be that as it may, the lawyer said, we are suspending Mr. Martinez's service assignment pending an internal review, and we will be filing a routine report with the county's corrections program about this unusual pattern of contact. Suspension, that was a disaster. If Leo failed to complete his hours, he would be in violation of his sentence. He could face jail time, all because she tried to apologize, to understand. She left the meeting feeling hollowed out. She had tried to navigate the situation and had only made it infinitely worse. She drove straight to Leo's garage, this time in a panic. She found him sanding the socket of a new prosthetic arm. He listened in silence as she explained the suspension, the report. He put down his sanding block, a deep weariness in his eyes. So that's it, they'll revoke my service, I'll get a warrant, I'll go to jail for 90 days. Mateo goes to his aunt. He stated it as simple, brutal fact. No, Elena said, the word bursting from her. I won't let that happen. How? Leo asked, a flicker of anger finally showing. You're the one who got me suspended. Your due diligence, your system. You can't fix this from inside your system, Judge. It's designed to crush things like this. He gestured around the workshop. She stood there, chastened. He was right. She was trying to use the tools of the institution to solve a problem the institution had created. It was like trying to use a hammer to perform surgery. She was making a mess. Then we go outside the system, she said, the idea forming as she spoke. What does that mean? It means I stop being a judge in this situation. I start being a witness. I have evidence that your conviction was wrongful. The pattern of the plaintiff's lawsuits, my investigator's findings, your neighbor's statement. I can submit an affidavit. Leo shook his head. And how do you explain why you, the sentencing judge, suddenly launched a private investigation into a closed case? The second you do that, they'll ask why you care. The connection will come out. Then we control the narrative, Elena said, a desperate plan crystallizing. We go public, not with everything, not about Chloe, not about the prosthetics, just about the wrongful conviction. We take it to the press. The story of a single dad mechanic, set up by a con artist, failed by the courts. Public pressure forces a review. It happens faster, and it looks like you're just a lucky guy who caught a judge's conscience on a slow day. Leo stared at her, stunned. You would do that? Risk your reputation? They'll say you're incompetent, that you didn't see the truth during the trial. "It's the truth," she said simply, "and right now, the truth is the only tool I have left that doesn't belong to them." But the universe, it seemed, was determined to stay one step ahead of their plans. The next morning, as Elena was drafting her affidavit, her clerk rushed into her chambers, her face pale. "Judge Vance, you need to see this." On the local news website was a headline, "Mechanic convicted of fraud accused of illegal medical practice." The article was short, citing anonymous sources at Brookside Children's Hospital. It claimed that Leo Martinez, while performing community service, had been questioned about providing unauthorized medical advice and modifications to patient equipment. It mentioned his suspension pending review. The article was careful, libel avoidant, but the implication was clear. The convict might be a danger to sick children. It was a leak from Henderson or someone on his staff. They had weaponized the suspension. The article didn't mention prosthetics, but it was a flare lighting up the sky for anyone with a grudge. The phone rang. It was the court's public information officer. "Judge Vance, we're getting press inquiries about a case you presided over, a Leo Martinez. They're asking about the community service placement at Brookside and these new allegations. Do you have a comment?" "No comment," Elena said, her voice tight. "The case is closed." But the case was very much open. By lunchtime, a local TV van was parked outside the courthouse. The story had the perfect mix of ingredients: a criminal, a children's hospital, and a shadowy accusation. It was designed to generate outrage, not understanding. The worst was yet to come. That afternoon, a man named David Kroll held a press conference on the steps of his auto shop. He was the buyer from Leo's case, the man who had started it all. "I'm glad someone is finally looking into this guy Martinez," Kroll said, speaking into a cluster of microphones. "I was his victim. He certified a death trap. Now I hear he's messing around with medical devices. It shows a pattern of deception. He's a menace. And I have to ask, why did he get such a light sentence? Just community service? Someone in the courts needs to be held accountable too." The shot was aimed directly at her. Kroll had seen the news and seized the opportunity to cement his own narrative and deflect any future scrutiny. He was tying Leo's new alleged misconduct to his old conviction and implicitly questioning her judgment. In her chambers, Elena watched the press conference online, a feeling of icy dread settling in her stomach. Kroll was shrewd. This wasn't just about Leo anymore, it was about her bench. The Judicial Review Board would have to take notice now. An investigation into her conduct was inevitable. She called Leo. He had seen it. "He's scared," Leo said, his voice surprisingly calm. "The news article scared him. He thinks if I fight the conviction, his scam will unravel, so he's going on the attack first, make me look so bad that no one will listen to me." "We have to move faster," Elena said. "I'm filing the affidavit with the court today, and I'm calling a reporter I trust. We break the real story about Kroll before he can define the narrative." But as she gathered her documents, her personal cell phone rang. An unknown number, she answered. "Judge Vance," a male voice said, "this is Ben Arlo with the State Judicial Conduct Commission. We'd like to schedule a preliminary interview with you tomorrow regarding your handling of the Martinez case and your subsequent contacts with the defendant." 9 a.m. They had moved with breathtaking speed. The system, when provoked, could be terrifyingly efficient. She agreed, her mouth dry. Hanging up, she knew the game had changed again. She was now a subject of an inquiry. Anything she did to help Leo could be seen as witness tampering or an attempt to influence an ongoing investigation into herself. She was paralyzed. She went home that night, the walls of her orderly life feeling like they were made of tissue paper. Chloe was excitedly showing her a new dance move, balancing effortlessly on her sparrow leg. The sight was a physical ache. This joy, this freedom, was the reason for the coming storm. The following morning, she sat across from two polite, implacable investigators from the Conduct Commission. They asked precise, devastating questions. Why had she visited the defendant's home? What was the nature of her due diligence? Had she uncovered evidence of a wrongful conviction after her verdict? If so, why had she not recused herself and reported it immediately through proper channels? She navigated the questions like she was walking through a legal minefield, sticking to her community service review story. It was a performance, and she could tell they weren't buying it. They had the security footage. They had the neighbor's statement about her car. They had a copy of the hospital's internal report. Judge Vance, one investigator said finally, closing his notebook. This presents a significant appearance of impropriety. At minimum, it shows extraordinarily poor judgment. The commission will likely recommend a temporary suspension from the bench pending a full hearing. Suspension, the word was a death knell for her career. Even if she was eventually cleared, the stain would never fully wash out. She nodded, numb. As she left the meeting, her phone buzzed. It was Leo. They were here, he said, his voice shaking with a fury she'd never heard. County code enforcement, and two guys from the state medical board. Someone filed anonymous complaints. The garage, they red tagged it. Unpermitted electrical work. Suspected biohazard materials from medical devices. They boxed up my tools. They took the 3D printer. They took all the unfinished prosthetics. They took the photo board. His voice broke. They took the sparrows, Elena. They took them all. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The anonymous complaint had Kroll's fingerprints all over it, but it could have been the hospital or even someone within the court system wanting to tidy up a messy situation. They had found the most efficient way to destroy him, not through the legal system he was already entangled in, but through the civic bureaucracy. They hadn't just stopped his work, they had erased it. Elena stood in the courthouse lobby, people flowing around her like she was a stone in a stream. She thought of the children waiting for those devices, the veteran in Texas, the clinic in Guatemala, the network of help, severed because she had stumbled into it and drawn the attention of the machine. She had tried to be a judge, then a witness, then a strategist. She had failed at all of it. The systems, legal, medical, bureaucratic, had fused into a single crushing weight. Leo was right. You couldn't fix a broken machine from the inside. And now, the one thing that truly worked, the garage, was gone. In that moment of utter defeat, a single, clear thought cut through the noise. It was a thought that would have horrified her just 2 weeks prior. It was the thought of a mother, not a judge. The rules had failed, the protocols had failed, the proper channels were weapons used against them. There was only one thing left that was more powerful than the machine, the truth, the whole, unvarnished, devastating truth. She got in her car, but she didn't drive home. She drove to the local newspaper, not to give a carefully managed statement to a trusted reporter. She walked into the bustling newsroom and asked to speak to the editor. She was done with strategies and half-truths. She was going to tell them everything, about the sparrow, about the garage, about the forum, about the $30 miracle and the $5,000 lie, about how a good man got caught between a con artist and a judge who couldn't tell the difference. She was going to burn her career to the ground to give him back his tools. It was the only move left that the system couldn't predict, because it wasn't a legal move. It wasn't even a political move. It was a human one. And as she sat down to talk, she knew one thing for certain: after today, nothing would ever be the same. The story did not just break. It detonated across the city, then the state, then the country. The newspaper's headline was stark: The Judge and the Sparrow, how a wrongful conviction uncovered a secret network of kindness. Elena's decision to offer the full, unshielded truth was a tactical nuclear option. The article had everything: the flawed case against Leo, the anonymous online forum where Fix It Forward operated, the $30 prosthetic that changed a little girl's life, the photograph of Chloe, with her mother's permission, smiling on her sparrow leg, the red-tagged garage. It framed the entire saga not as a scandal, but as a tragedy of good intentions crushed by rigid, intersecting bureaucracies. The public reaction was immediate and volcanic, but not in the way Elena had feared. People weren't outraged at her. They were outraged for her, for Leo, for Chloe. The narrative of a single father mechanic using his skills to give children mobility for the cost of materials, only to be destroyed by a liar and a faceless system, was irresistibly powerful. Social media ignited. The hashtag #Sparrowleg trended. A fundraising page for Leo's legal fees and to rebuild his workshop hit its goal in 4 hours. Parents of disabled children from around the world began sharing their own stories of battling insurance companies over prosthetic costs that could reach $20,000. The institutional response was swift, but panicked. The Judicial Conduct Commission abruptly postponed its hearing, issuing a terse statement about awaiting the full context of developing public information. The district attorney's office, facing a media firestorm, announced it would expedite a review of Leo's conviction. The Code Enforcement and Medical Board, now painted as villainous goons who confiscated charity work, quietly arranged for Leo's tools and printer to be returned. The boxes were left on his driveway one night, no note attached. But the most significant call came from the chief judge of the circuit court. He asked Elena to meet him, not in his office, but at a neutral coffee shop. He was an older man nearing retirement. He didn't mention the article. Instead, he stirred his coffee and said, "Elena, you've presented us with an impossible equation. The rules exist to prevent corruption, to maintain order. You broke those rules, visibly, repeatedly." Elena, drained of all defensiveness, simply nodded. "I know." But he continued, "The rules are also supposed to produce justice. In this instance, they clearly did not. They produced a grievous error, and then they punished the attempt to correct it. The public sees that now. If we suspend you, we look like we're punishing the whistleblower. If we do nothing, we look like we endorse vigilante justice from the bench. So, we're creating a new rule." He slid a folder across the table. It was a proposal for a pilot program, the Innocence Review Initiative, a small, independent panel that would re-examine closed misdemeanor cases where new, compelling evidence of wrongful conviction emerged. It would exist outside the normal appellate chain, designed for speed. "We want you to chair it," the chief judge said. "Your suspension will be framed as a temporary administrative leave to stand up this new office. Your unconventional methods have shown a catastrophic gap in our process. Now you get to build the bridge across it." It was a breathtaking offer, a way to channel the catastrophe into systemic change. It saved her career, but more importantly, it validated her core, shattered belief that the law could be a force for good. She accepted. For Leo, the aftermath was a whirlwind. The DA's review took all of 72 hours. With Elena's affidavit, the evidence of the plaintiff's fraud pattern, and the overwhelming public sentiment, they moved to vacate his conviction. He stood in a different courtroom, before a different judge, and heard the words "case dismissed." The record would be expunged. He was a free man with no stain on his name. The return tools felt different in his hands. They were no longer just his. They were symbols of a fight that hundreds of thousands of people had joined. The fundraiser money far exceeded what he needed. He created the Sparrow Workshop, a formal nonprofit. He rented a proper industrial space. He hired 2 part-time engineers. One was a veteran who used one of Leo's early leg prototypes. The photo board went back up on a bigger wall, now with thousands of new pictures sent in from around the globe. He invited Elena to the opening. She brought Chloe. The little girl ran through the new, bright space, marveling at the large 3D printers humming along. She stopped in front of a finished prosthetic arm, painted with rainbow colors. "Who's that for?" she asked Leo. "A girl in California who wants to be a painter," Leo said, smiling. "It's her 3rd one. She outgrows them fast." Chloe looked at her own leg, then at her mother. "Can I help?" And so, on Saturdays, the routine changed. Instead of pancakes at a cafe, Elena and Chloe went to the Sparrow Workshop. Chloe, with a keen eye for color, helped choose shades for socket covers. Elena, using her legal mind, helped navigate the new nonprofit's paperwork and liability waivers. It was no longer a secret, it was a partnership. The final surprising twist came 6 months later. Elena was at her new office for the Innocence Review Initiative when her assistant said a David Kroll was there to see her, insisting it was urgent. The man who started it all. She had him shown in. He looked diminished, nervous. "I'll get to the point," he said, not meeting her eyes. "My lawyer says you could still sue me for malicious prosecution." Leo could. I'm sorry." Elena studied him. The anger was gone, replaced by a weary understanding of the fear and smallness that drives people to such acts. "An apology isn't a legal defense, Mr. Kroll." "I know," he said, "but I'm not here for a deal, I'm here to work. I'm a certified electrician. I lost my license after everything came out. I've been following the Sparrow workshop in the news. I see you're expanding. You'll need your electrical systems upgraded to code. I'll do it for free, every hour of it. Just tell him I'm sorry." It was the last thing she expected. Redemption, not through the courts, but through the offer of a practical skill. She didn't promise anything. She took his card, and later that day she told Leo. Leo was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Have him call the shop manager. We'll vet him like any other volunteer. If he's legit and he works, then he works." It was the ultimate embodiment of Leo's philosophy. If you can fix it, you should, even if the thing that's broken is a person. The story had a final, quiet coda. A year after the article, Elena was presiding over a different case in her original courtroom. A young man was before her, charged with petty theft. His public defender gave the usual pleas about hardship. But instead of just listening to the facts of the crime, Elena found herself asking different questions. What did he fix? What was he good at? Was there a way to pay back the community that used that skill? The defense attorney looked startled. It wasn't standard procedure. Later in her chambers, she looked at the photo on her desk. It was of her, Leo, and Chloe in the Sparrow workshop, all covered in vibrant paint splatters, laughing. The law was no longer a blind, crushing machine. It was a tool, one of many. And sometimes the most important repairs happened outside the official shop, in garages and in headlines, and in the quiet, brave decision to tell the truth. The gavel was still in her hand, but now she knew its weight could be used to build, not just to hammer down. The single dad mechanic had given her daughter the ability to walk, and in doing so, he had given a judge the ability to see. So what is the real moral of this story? That one good man was saved by the system reforming, that a judge found her conscience. Those are satisfying endings, but they miss the larger, messier truth. This story is a map of the cracks. It shows where our official systems, legal, medical, bureaucratic, end, and where human ingenuity and compassion begin. We built a world that says a prosthetic leg must cost $5,000, must be approved by a panel, must be fitted by a certified professional, all important safeguards. And then we built a world where 95% of the people who need that leg cannot access it. Into that gap steps a man in a garage with a $30 solution. The system's response wasn't gratitude. It was to red tag his workshop for unpermitted electrical work. This is the central tension of our time. We venerate the institution, the license, the official stamp, even when it fails us. And we often criminalize the improvised, the grassroots, the gift, even when it works. Leo wasn't just fixing limbs, he was pointing to a catastrophic market failure. Elena wasn't just breaking rules, she was discovering that her beloved rulebook had no chapter for this particular miracle. The Sparrow Workshop still operates today. It's legal now, a non-profit. It has liability insurance and certified engineers. But its heart is still the same. Use open-source designs, scavenge materials, and give mobility away for the cost of parts. They've shipped arms to war zones and legs to farm communities, all while navigating the very systems that once tried to shut them down. The garage didn't lose. It just got bigger and learned to fill out its paperwork. David Kroll, the man who started the chain of lies, did complete his electrical work at the shop. He wasn't forgiven in a dramatic speech. He was given a voltage tester and a task. He did good work. That's often what redemption looks like, not an apology, but a useful pair of hands. Which leaves us with the lingering question. In your own life, what do you value more? The proper certificate on the wall or the proven ability to fix what's broken? The official path or the hidden network of help? We all depend on systems, but we live in the spaces between them. The next time you see a problem, you might not have a judge's gavel or an engineer's printer, but you will have a choice, to follow the rules or to build a new thing in the garage. If this story changed your perspective on where real help comes from, let me know in the comments. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes justice isn't found in a courtroom, but in an act of quiet, skilled kindness. And subscribe for more documentaries that explore the hidden connections that shape our world. Because the most important stories are often the ones happening just out of sight, in a workshop, on a forum, in the moment someone decides to give a stranger a seat at their table or a sparrow for their leg.